Imagine that tonight you had to leave your home. You have 10 minutes. You can fill 2 bags, and you'll never see anything you own ever again. What would you take? Your passport, a diamond ring, your bank records, your diplomas? What would you leave behind? What if you had to leave everything behind and start from scratch? If you're a survivor of abuse, you may not have access to your bank account. Your credit score may have been ruined to the point that you may not qualify for a loan or for a credit check for your next apartment. Would you leave your dog behind, knowing that she might be harmed if she's not there with you to protect her? These are just some of the questions that survivors of abuse must answer, most often without any sort of support or resources. And so for many, it's the little things that matter most. It's the macaroni necklace that her son made for her for Mother's Day. It's the faded hymnal that her grandmother gave her before passing away a few years earlier. Sometimes it's just an old photo of herself, a reminder of who she was before the cycle of abuse began. And so, of course, these objects are not just things. They're proof of her identity, of continuity, of worth. They remind survivors that they're more than what was done to them. So far too often, the prospect of losing everything they own forces survivors of abuse to choose between one of 2 terrible options: leave and risk falling into poverty, or stay and endure more violence at the hands of an abuser. Because here and around the world, the most dangerous place for a woman or child is in their own home. On average, a woman leaves and returns to her abuser 6 times over the course of the relationship. Abuse can take many forms. It can last months or even years. And survivors explain how their abuser slowly and meticulously stripped them of their identity, of their sense of autonomy, distancing them from their friends and their family. And at some point in most abusive relationships, the survivor will conclude that they must leave. They'll wait for an opportunity when the abuser's gone, and with a child in one hand and a bag of essentials in the other, she'll run to a bus, a taxi, a friend's house, maybe a local shelter. There's rarely a detailed plan in these escapes, but survivors know that if they flee, they're fleeing what is likely to be even more significant danger in the home, up to and including murder. In Canada, a woman or girl is killed every 2 days. And in most of the time, survivors do lose everything they own. And that sets in motion a cycle of vulnerability and insecurity. And so what parent would put their child in that position? Recent data indicates that over 270,000 cases of abuse are reported to police each year in our country alone. Behind every one of those calls is a person weighing the most difficult decision of their life. And yet, when a woman is murdered by her partner or a family member, the question so many of us still ask is, why didn't she just leave? Maybe we've been asking the wrong question for a very long time. Instead, what if we asked, how were the circumstances so impossible that she felt she couldn't? This question has preoccupied me for a very long time. In the winter of 2016, our 3rd child, Clarice, was fast asleep in her new crib, surrounded by newborn gifts and messages filled with love. And as I watched her, I felt what a lot of parents hope to feel. I felt gratitude, safety, possibility. But something stirred inside me, something very uncomfortable. It was a question that I just couldn't shake. If my child could sleep safely in her bed, shouldn't every child have the same? At the same time, news of violence against women was appearing more frequently. And each one of those stories had a different family or a different address, but the pattern was painfully similar. Why do we accept staggering levels of violence against women and children in our country? Surely we can do better. Surely we must do better. But how? And so for the last decade, I've attempted to answer that very question. In 2016, I founded Shelter Movers, a national charity that provides moving services at no cost to survivors fleeing abuse. Our purpose is simple: to coordinate a safe and reliable move from an abusive household to a safe location so that survivors can leave with their belongings and in dignity. Today, Shelter Movers is powered by over 1,000 volunteers and small staff teams situated in cities across Canada. And since 2016, we've completed over 10,000 moves, moving up to 180 families in a given month. And as the only service of this kind, we operate in partnership with hundreds of survivor-serving organizations, shelters, police, social workers, and they will refer women to our service. Now, when I started developing this idea, people had a lot of questions. Most assumed that I was a survivor. I'm not. And as a white cis man, I looked and sounded like those who were causing the harm. How could I ever really understand what a survivor is going through? Who am I to assume what women fleeing violence would want or need? But something very powerful happens when we take the time to simply ask people what they need, without judgment or assumptions. So that's what I did. And with the support of a local shelter, I met with survivors, and I listened. And they told me one of the biggest barriers to leaving was the overwhelming feeling of having to plan, pay for, and efficiently get out of the unsafe home. How would I actually go about moving my stuff, my pets, my children, without him knowing? They would tell me. He controlled my phone. He controlled our accounts. I was so afraid, they would say. So it turned out that the need for the service was obvious to everyone with whom I spoke. What was missing was a way to bring all the pieces together. So my wife and I did something very simple. We agreed to pay for a van rental and a little bit of storage, and I recruited a few friends to help test the concept for a free moving service for survivors. And after my day job, I would jump in the van with a few volunteers, and on a piece of paper, I'd have a name and an address given to me by the local shelter. Our job was straight up: go to the location, identify the person, gather her and her kids in the vehicles with their belongings, and get them to a safe place. Because of the risk of retaliation from the abuser, we began engaging police and private security to attend the moves. And slowly, word spread. Within a few weeks, dozens of people had signed up to train to be movers and drivers. Donations started coming in to cover our insurance and our gas, storage, and moving supplies. But the real story isn't in the numbers. It's who showed up. Women were the first to volunteer, but then men started joining too. And I soon realized that Shelter Movers was offering them a rare invitation to show where they stand on the issue of male violence against women. For many, it was the first time they were being called into the solution rather than being called out as the problem. If violence against women is not a women's issue, but in fact a reflection of how we raise our boys and young men, maybe Shelter Movers could offer a counter-narrative, a version of masculinity rooted in service, dependability, and compassion. Today, Shelter Movers is powered by a remarkably diverse cross-section of society, all coming together with the same purpose: to remind survivors of their inherent value and that their courage deserves more than our sympathy. It deserves action. And along the way, I learned something about myself. My social position, my education, my professional training, these could all be put to use in service to my neighbors. My superpower was my ability to organize people around a mission bigger than themselves, with the goal of making a tangible difference in the lives of the people we serve and maybe set them on a path to hope and security. Not long ago, we moved a woman and her children into their new home. They'd spent nearly a year in shelter, hiding from their abuser, healing, and reconstructing their lives. All the while, shelter movers had kept their belongings safe in storage. I remember it was a summer day, and we were carrying her couch in and her table and her children's toys into this bright new apartment. Her children were running around laughing, and somehow those boxes that were holding entirely ordinary things felt extraordinary. And then in the middle of her new living room, I noticed the survivor stand a little taller. And she turned around to us and she said, "I did it. I'm finally free." And we said, "Yes, you are." And she said, "I made it out. He said I wasn't going to amount to anything." And we said, "Yes, you did." Now, it's important to understand that on that day, shelter movers did not save that woman. She saved herself. We were just the moving crew in the background of her amazing story. Quite simply, she had found the courage to leave, and we found the hands to help her. Because serving others creates an incredible opportunity to walk beside someone through a short period of what is often a long journey of healing. It is a very, very special experience that I wish for all of us. One of shelter movers' first moves was for a woman and her young son. He was maybe 8 years old at the time. They had fled the night before to their neighbor's basement. And so when we arrived, we found her and her son hidden behind a wall of boxes that they'd built up around them. It's been 10 years since I was on that move, and I think about that little boy a lot these days, because this year, he'll turn into an adult. And I wonder what kind of man he chose to be, how he sees his mother, how he sees women. And I think back to that night when his mother courageously made that call for help, and a group of strangers arrived at her door with a truck and some boxes and a warm smile, and we asked her how we could help. And I'd like to think that that night changed the trajectory of that young boy's life. Maybe it helped break the cycle of abuse, finally. Like many organizations working to create social change, I know shelter movers alone will not solve gender-based violence. The problem is too complex, it's too pervasive, and still too deeply embedded in our societal norms and traditions. But what if shelter movers was available wherever survivors needed us? What if we were moving tens of thousands of survivors and children in every community across our country? At that scale, thousands of children would see a new model of courage, compassion, and community, and tens of thousands of survivors would be able to rebuild their lives without losing everything. That is the level of generational change that, with the right support, I believe this movement will achieve. And so I'll conclude by leaving you with these questions. What gifts can you offer those around you? And what do you feel compelled to change in your community? Maybe you're an organizer, maybe you're a great listener, maybe you're an expert in your field. Or maybe you just have 2 strong hands and a free Saturday afternoon like I did. But I can tell you from experience, direct, compassionate engagement with our most vulnerable neighbors does not require elaborate plans, advanced degrees, or deep pockets. If you're able to help, then I believe we have a responsibility to do so. With empathy and humility and some resourcefulness, you have the power to identify the need and create a solution based on the best parts of you. That's what shelter movers did for me. It gave me a chance to make the world better, safer, and more hopeful for the children we serve, so that they can sleep as peacefully as my Clarice. Thank you very much.